a millionaire discovered his long-lost daughter in an orphanage. His journey to rebuild their relationship uncovered years of hurt. The autumn breeze rustled through the courtyard of Hope's Haven Orphanage as Marcus Wilson, billionaire CEO of Wilson Enterprises, mindlessly flipped through old files during a routine charity inspection. His world stopped when a single date caught his eye: June 15, 2002. The birth date on Emily Anderson's file matched the day Sarah disappeared from his life 22 years ago. His hands trembled as he studied the photograph, those familiar hazel eyes, that determined chin. The same features that haunted his dreams for decades. In that moment, surrounded by dusty records and fading memories, Marcus realized his life's biggest success might also be his greatest failure. Before we dive into this emotional journey, please take a moment to let us know where you're watching from and hit subscribe to stay connected with more heartwarming stories of love and redemption. Marcus Wilson had mastered everything in life except what mattered most. From the gleaming 80-story Wilson Tower piercing Manhattan's skyline to his fleet of electric vehicles transforming urban transport, success seemed to follow his every move. Yet each night he returned to his penthouse overlooking Central Park, feeling the weight of something missing. At 45, Marcus had built Wilson Enterprises from a small tech startup into a global empire spanning real estate, sustainable energy, and urban development. His net worth exceeded $20 billion, but he measured his wealth in lonely nights and empty chairs at his massive dining table. The business magazines praised his vision of modernizing cities through efficient, environmentally conscious development. His latest project, converting struggling communities into state-of-the-art residential complexes, had earned him both acclaim and criticism. Behind the confident smile he wore at board meetings and charity galas lay a man haunted by his past. 22 years ago, before the money and fame, he was just a struggling entrepreneur living in a cramped studio apartment. That's when he met Sarah Collins, a talented artist working at a local cafe. Their love story was intense but brief. She disappeared without explanation, leaving only a hastily written note about needing to figure things out. He threw himself into his work, believing success would fill the void she left. His closest relationship now was with his assistant of 15 years, Jennifer Parker, who managed every aspect of his life with military precision. She protected him from gold diggers, scheduled his therapy sessions, and ensured his public image remained impeccable. The irony wasn't lost on him. He could sign billion-dollar deals but couldn't maintain a meaningful personal relationship. Marcus's philanthropy became his attempt at connection. He donated millions to various causes, but his passion project was modernizing orphanages. He believed that by replacing outdated facilities with modern care centers, he could give abandoned children the opportunities he never had growing up with his single mother in Queens. His latest initiative aimed to consolidate smaller orphanages into large, efficiently run facilities with state-of-the-art education and healthcare services. The morning of his visit to Hope's Haven Orphanage, he had just finalized plans to acquire and modernize 12 small orphanages across New York State. The project would displace hundreds temporarily, but ultimately provide better care for thousands. At least that's what the projections showed. Numbers never lied. They were his constant companions, reliable unlike people. During board meetings, he justified his decisions with cost-benefit analyses and impact assessments. Sentiment doesn't feed children, he would say, dismissing concerns about community disruption. Modern facilities and professional care give them a fighting chance. His childhood memories of watching his mother work 3 jobs fueled his belief that efficiency and scale were the answers to social problems. Yet sometimes, in rare moments of vulnerability, Marcus questioned whether his drive to modernize and improve everything around him was really about helping others or filling his own emptiness. His therapist suggested he was trying to fix his past by controlling his future, but he dismissed such analysis as psychological nonsense. The few who knew him well noticed how he avoided personal questions, how he changed the subject when relationships came up, how his smile never quite reached his eyes during celebrations. His mother, before passing away 5 years ago, had begged him to find someone to share his life with. "All this success means nothing if you have no one to share it with," she had said. He had nodded, made promises he knew he wouldn't keep, and buried himself deeper in his work. The morning he walked into Hope's Haven, Marcus Wilson was a man who had everything and nothing. His tailored suit and confident stride masked a profound loneliness that no amount of success could cure. He was there to evaluate another acquisition, another facility to modernize, another problem to solve with money and efficiency. He had no idea he was about to confront the one thing his wealth couldn't control: his past. Emily Anderson moved through the worn corridors of Hope's Haven Orphanage with the quiet confidence of someone who knew every creaking floorboard and loose doorknob. At 22, she taught art to the children, the same class that had once been her escape. Her small classroom, with its paint-splattered tables and walls covered in children's artwork, stood as a testament to her belief that a home isn't defined by its facilities, but by the love within its walls. Unlike most who aged out of the system, Emily chose to stay. She lived in a modest apartment near the orphanage, spending most of her days helping Mrs. Grace Thompson, the elderly director who had become a surrogate mother to generations of children. The old Victorian mansion that housed Hope's Haven might have been outdated by modern standards, but every corner held stories of healing and hope. Emily's earliest memory was of Mrs. Thompson's gentle hands guiding her through the front doors at age 3. Her file contained only basic information: born June 15, 2002, mother Sarah Collins, father unknown. The only physical connection to her past was a silver locket containing a faded photograph of her mother and a tiny folded note that read, "Love finds its way home, she wore it every day," a reminder that she came from love, even if circumstances had forced her mother's hand. Despite the hardships of growing up in an orphanage, Emily thrived. She excelled academically, earning a scholarship to study education at NYU. Her weekends were spent organizing art therapy sessions for traumatized children, understanding firsthand how creativity could heal wounded hearts. The children called her Miss Emmy, following her around like ducklings, drawn to her combination of strength and gentleness. Her closest ally was David Mitchell, a social worker who shared her passion for traditional care methods. Together, they developed programs that emphasized emotional support over institutional efficiency. Their success stories included teenagers others had given up on, children who found their voice through art, and families healed through patience and understanding. The threat of closure had been looming over Hope's Haven for months. Modern facilities were sprouting up across the city, promising better resources and professional care. Emily fought against these changes, writing op-eds and organizing community meetings. "You can't quantify love," she would argue passionately. "You can't measure healing in square footage and staff ratios." Her office wall displayed photographs of every child who had passed through her art class. Among them was Tommy, a formerly mute 6-year-old who spoke his first words while painting. There was Maria, who overcame severe anxiety through sculpting. Each success story reinforced Emily's belief that children needed more than just modern facilities; they needed a place that felt like home. Unknown to many, Emily spent her evenings tending to a secret garden behind the orphanage. It had been overgrown when she discovered it as a child, but something about the wild roses and tangled vines called to her. Over years, she restored it to life, creating a sanctuary where troubled children could find peace. She never knew this garden held secrets about her own past, planted there by loving hands long ago. The children currently at Hope's Haven turned to Emily for comfort when rumors of closure began circulating. She promised them they wouldn't lose their home, though uncertainty gnawed at her heart. Every night she would climb to the orphanage's roof, her childhood thinking spot, and stare at the city lights, wondering about her mother. Did she ever think about her? Did she know Emily had followed in her footsteps, choosing to help others even when her own heart ached? Despite her outward strength, Emily carried deep wounds. Each birthday spent without family, each Mother's Day creating cards for absent parents, each graduation celebration missing the proud faces other students took for granted, these moments had left their marks. Yet instead of becoming bitter, she channeled her pain into purpose, determined to ensure no child at Hope's Haven felt the sting of abandonment she had known. Sarah Collins's story lived on in a worn leather journal hidden in Hope's Haven's archives, its pages filled with the elegant handwriting of a young artist who faced impossible choices. In the summer of 2001, she was a promising art student working at the Morning Brew Cafe in downtown Manhattan, her sketchbook filled with dreams of gallery exhibitions and teaching at prestigious art schools. That's where she met Marcus Wilson, a passionate entrepreneur with big ideas and empty pockets. Their love bloomed over spilled coffee and shared dreams, her artistic vision complementing his practical ambitions. In her journal, Sarah described Marcus as a man who could see the future in a way that made you believe in impossible things. Their evenings were spent in his tiny apartment, Sarah sketching while Marcus outlined business plans on recycled paper. The unexpected pregnancy coincided with Marcus's first major business opportunity, a chance to pitch to significant investors. Sarah kept the news to herself, watching him prepare for the meeting that could change his life. The morning sickness she hid behind her cafe apron, the doctor's appointments scheduled during her breaks, the growing fear in her heart, all remained her secret burden. When the investment came through, Marcus was ecstatic, his dreams finally taking shape. Sarah made her decision then, watching him celebrate. His future was bright, unencumbered. She wouldn't be the one to clip his wings with responsibility he wasn't ready for. Her last entry before leaving read, "Sometimes love means letting go, even when your heart begs to hold on." The next few years were documented in careful notes attached to small donations she managed to send to Hope's Haven, working multiple jobs, battling illness, yet always setting aside something for the daughter she had entrusted to Mrs. Thompson's care. Her art students at community centers brought in barely enough to survive, but Sarah never missed a month's contribution, even if it meant going hungry herself. Mrs. Thompson kept every letter Sarah wrote, each one asking about Emily's progress while begging for secrecy. "Let her believe she was given up for a better life," Sarah had written. "Don't let her carry the weight of my choices." The letters spoke of a mother's love expressed through sacrifice, of nights spent painting commissioned pieces to send extra money for Emily's art supplies. Sarah's final years were spent teaching art to disadvantaged children in the Bronx, her illness advancing but her spirit undiminished. She created a series of paintings titled Messages for Emily, each containing hidden symbols and stories she hoped her daughter would one day understand. These works, along with letters and keepsakes, were carefully preserved in a time capsule buried in Hope's Haven's garden. The last letter, written from her hospital bed, revealed her biggest regret, never telling Marcus about his daughter. "I thought I was protecting both of them," she wrote to Mrs. Thompson, "but perhaps I was just afraid. Afraid of his rejection, afraid of disrupting his success, afraid of my own inadequacy. Tell Emily, when she's ready, that every choice I made was born of love, even the wrong ones." Sarah passed away quietly in 2019, her hospital room decorated with children's artwork and thank you notes from students whose lives she had touched. Her last act was to sign over her modest life insurance policy to Hope's Haven, ensuring that her contribution to the home that raised her daughter would continue even after she was gone. Unknown to both Marcus and Emily, Sarah had been Hope's Haven's anonymous benefactor for years, her small but consistent donations helping keep the aging facility running. She had watched from afar as Marcus's success grew, collecting newspaper clippings of his achievements while holding the weight of her secret. Her journal's final entry spoke of peace. "I may have lost my chance at love, but I gave love the chance to find its own way home." The moment Marcus saw Emily's birth date in the file, his world tilted on its axis. His hands, steady through billion-dollar negotiations, trembled as he pulled out his phone to call James Reynolds, his most trusted private investigator. "Drop everything," he commanded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need everything you can find on an Emily Anderson, born June 15, 2002, and her mother, Sarah Collins." Within hours, James had compiled an initial report. Each new detail hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sarah's pregnancy, her disappearance, her years of struggling alone, her death in a public hospital while he'd been celebrating another corporate takeover in his penthouse just miles away. The weight of 22 years of unknowing crashed down on his shoulders. The investigation revealed a pattern of small donations to Hope's Haven, traced back to various addresses where Sarah had lived. Medical records showed her battle with an aggressive illness while working multiple jobs. Her death certificate listed no next of kin except a daughter she had given up for adoption. Marcus sat in his office until dawn, surrounded by papers that told the story of two lives that should have been intertwined with his. James's deeper dive uncovered Sarah's art career, small exhibitions in community centers, teaching jobs at local schools, commissioned work sold to pay for Emily's needs. A pattern emerged of a woman who had sacrificed everything for her child's well-being. The final report included photographs Sarah at various ages, Emily growing up at Hope's Haven, and most devastatingly, a picture of Sarah at the Morning Brew Cafe where they had first met. Marcus hired additional investigators to verify every detail. They found Sarah's former colleagues, her students, her neighbors. Each person painted the same picture, a kind, talented woman who never spoke of her past but whose eyes held deep sadness. They discovered her small apartment in the Bronx, still containing unsold paintings and a box of newspaper clippings about Marcus's rising success. The most difficult discovery came in the form of a letter Sarah had written to Emily but never sent, found among her belongings after her death. In it, she explained her choices, her love, and her regret at never telling Marcus the truth. "Your father wasn't a bad man," she had written. "He was a dreamer with the potential to change the world. I chose to let him fly, hoping one day our paths would cross again." As the evidence mounted, Marcus faced a cruel irony. His plans to modernize Hope's Haven, the very place that had raised his daughter, now seemed like another unconscious attempt to rewrite a past he hadn't even known existed. The facility he had dismissed as outdated had been Emily's sanctuary, supported by Sarah's sacrificial giving. The final piece of the investigation arrived on Marcus's desk 3 weeks after his initial discovery. It was a recording of Sarah's last art class, filmed by one of her students. In it, she spoke about the power of love to transcend time and circumstance. Sometimes, she said, looking directly into the camera as if she knew Marcus would one day see it, "Our biggest mistakes come from trying to protect those we love from pain." Marcus spent a full day in his office, doors locked, security instructed to hold all calls. He stared at Emily's photograph, seeing Sarah's gentle eyes and his own determined expression merged in their daughter's face. The stack of investigative reports on his desk told a story of love, sacrifice, and missed connections that no business success could ever compensate for. That evening, standing at his penthouse window overlooking the city, Marcus made a decision. He would find a way to right this wrong, to honor Sarah's sacrifice, and to build a bridge to the daughter he never knew he had. But first, he had to stop his own company from destroying the only home she had ever known. Richard Hayes, chairman of Wilson Enterprises' board of directors, stood at the podium in Hope's Haven's ancient assembly hall, his crisp suit a stark contrast to the worn wooden floors and faded wallpaper. In 6 months, this facility will be transformed into the Wilson Center for Child Development, a state-of-the-art institution capable of serving 3 times the current population with modern amenities and professional care. His words echoed through the room like a death knell. The children huddled together on the old benches, some crying silently, others clutching their friends' hands. Mrs. Thompson sat ramrod straight in her chair, her face a mask of dignified defiance. Emily stood at the back of the room, her fingers wrapped around her mother's locket so tightly her knuckles turned white. The corporate team continued their presentation, showing sleek architectural renderings of glass and steel structures that would replace the Victorian mansion. Television crews captured the moment for the evening news, another historic building making way for progress. Local reporters scribbled notes about increased capacity, improved facilities, and enhanced educational opportunities. Nobody seemed to notice the small details, the height marks on doorframes tracking children's growth, the hand-painted murals in the hallways, the garden where troubled kids found peace. David Mitchell, standing beside Emily, muttered under his breath about the impossibility of quantifying love in square footage. The new facility would have security cameras instead of misses. Thompson's vigilant eyes, scheduled activity periods instead of spontaneous story times, and standardized meal plans instead of Cook Martha's intuitive understanding of each child's favorites. The presentation outlined the transition plan. Children would be temporarily relocated to various facilities across the state. Staff would need to reapply for positions in the new center, with updated qualification requirements. The businessman speaking these words never looked directly at Mrs. Thompson, who had raised 3 generations of children without a single degree in child psychology. Emily watched the younger children's faces, remembering her own fears when similar rumors had circulated years ago. Tommy, the once mute boy who now spoke through his paintings, tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Emmy, will they have our art room in the new place?" Before she could answer, the presenter switched to a slide showing multi-purpose activity spaces, sterile rooms with motivational posters on the walls. The questions from the audience revealed the community's deep concerns. Parents who had adopted children from Hope's Haven spoke about the personalized support they'd received. Former residents testified about Mrs. Thompson's middle-of-the-night comfort during nightmares. Current children asked about their pets, their gardens, their special hiding places. The Wilson Enterprises team had rehearsed responses about professional counseling services and structured animal therapy programs. In the middle of this, Marcus Wilson sat silently in the back row, his usual confidence shattered by the weight of what he now knew. He watched Emily comfort the children, saw her quiet strength, so like her mother's, and felt the magnitude of his failure to recognize what truly mattered. The corporate messaging about progress and efficiency, once his gospel, now sounded hollow in his ears. The announcement concluded with a timeline: 3 months for initial preparations, 3 months for the transition, and then demolition would begin. A PR team distributed glossy brochures showing happy children in pristine environments, while real children cried in the hallways of their soon-to-be-lost home. As the crowd dispersed, Emily found herself in the secret garden, her sanctuary since childhood. The rose bushes her mother had secretly tended decades ago still bloomed, oblivious to the corporate decision that would soon reduce them to rubble. She pulled out her phone and began documenting everything: the worn banisters, the children's artwork, the hidden corners where generations had found solace. If Hope's Haven was to be erased, she would ensure its memory survived. The evening news painted it as a story of progress: historic orphanage to become modern care facility, but within Hope's Haven's walls, a community grieved. Mrs. Thompson spent the night writing letters to every child who had ever passed through her care, asking for their help in fighting the closure. The current residents held an impromptu sleepover in the main hall, as if their presence could somehow protect their home. Emily launched her resistance campaign from the art room, transforming it into a command center for saving Hope's Haven. Her students' paintings became protest signs, their artwork evidence of the healing that took place within these old walls. She worked through nights, fueled by determination and coffee, crafting a strategy that would combine emotional appeal with hard data. Her first move was to reach out to Hope's Haven's alumni network. Successful professionals who had once called this place home began sharing their stories online. A renowned surgeon spoke about Mrs. Thompson teaching him to read late at night. A best-selling author credited the quiet library corner for sparking her imagination. A tech entrepreneur remembered learning coding on the orphanage's single shared computer, driven by Mrs. Thompson's encouragement. David Mitchell contributed by compiling statistics that challenged Wilson Enterprises' efficiency claims. Their research showed that Hope's Haven's outdated. Methods resulted in higher college acceptance rates, better emotional adjustment scores, and stronger long-term family bonds than many modern facilities. Emily presented these findings at community meetings, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Local media began picking up the story. Emily's passionate articulation of Hope's Heaven's value resonated with viewers. She spoke about Tommy's first words spoken while painting, about Maria overcoming panic attacks in the secret garden, about countless small victories that couldn't be replicated in a sterile institutional setting. Her interviews went viral, drawing attention from national news outlets. The children joined the fight in their own way. They created a video tour of Hope's Haven, showing their favorite spots and explaining why each mattered. 8-year-old Lisa showed the kitchen, where cook Martha taught her to bake cookies. Teenage James demonstrated how the creaky third step warned them of approaching adults during late-night snack raids. Their innocent perspectives highlighted what the corporate presentations missed the soul of the place. Emily organized peaceful protests that captured public imagination. Children sat on the mansion's steps reading stories aloud, their small voices carrying messages about home and belonging. Former residents formed a human chain around the building every Sunday, sharing their Hope's Haven stories with passers-by. The demonstrations never turned angry or violent. Emily insisted they show the same grace and dignity Mrs. Thompson had taught them. The financial battle proved more challenging. Emily discovered that several smaller orphanages had already succumbed to Wilson Enterprises' modernization campaign. She reached out to their former staff, documenting the traumatic impact of displacement on children. Her report, titled The Human Cost of Progress, began circulating among child welfare advocates and catching the attention of state legislators. Personal threats to her career didn't deter Emily. When Wilson Enterprises suggested her teaching license could be affected by her disruptive activities, she replied with a publicly shared letter about the ethical obligation to protect vulnerable children. Support poured in from teachers' unions and child advocacy groups, turning her potential persecution into a rallying point. The garden became her refuge during this battle. Late at night, after strategy sessions and media interviews, she would sit among the roses her unknown mother had planted, drawing strength from their endurance. She wrote her own journal during these moments, unaware that somewhere in the building, similar pages, written by Sarah Collins, held answers to her questions. The fight took its toll. Emily lost sleep, missed meals, and poured her savings into the campaign. Yet each time exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, a child would bring her a drawing or share a hope for the future, renewing her determination. She carried her mother's locket like a talisman, sometimes talking to the faded photograph as if seeking guidance from the woman who had first taught her about sacrifice. The Wilson Enterprises town hall meeting erupted into chaos when Emily Anderson strode to the microphone. The corporate boardroom, with its mahogany panels and crystal chandeliers, fell silent as she faced Marcus Wilson directly for the first time. "Mr. Wilson, you talk about progress, but have you ever spent a night in an orphanage? Have you held a crying child who's lost everything except the walls that have become home?" Marcus gripped the podium, his prepared speech forgotten as he stared into eyes that mirrored Sarah's. The press cameras clicked furiously, capturing the moment David versus Goliath, the orphan teacher confronting the billionaire developer. His throat tightened as Emily continued, her voice carrying years of pain and purpose. "You see outdated facilities, we see birthdays marked on doorframes, you calculate square footage. We measure healing in heartbeats. That garden you plan to bulldoze? It's where Tommy spoke his first words after 3 years of silence. Those inefficient small group homes? They're where Maria finally stopped flinching at human touch." The board members shifted uncomfortably as Emily projected photographs onto the screen behind Marcus. Children's artwork, holiday celebrations, quiet moments of comfort, the daily magic of Hope's Haven captured in simple snapshots. Each image stood in stark contrast to the sterile renderings of the proposed new facility. "Your report claims we're operating below capacity," Emily challenged, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But you're measuring the wrong things. How do you quantify Mrs. Thompson's 3 a.m. vigils with nightmare-haunted children? What's the efficiency rating for Cook Martha knowing every child's comfort food? Where in your metrics is the value of consistency for kids who've lost everything else?" Marcus felt the room turning against him. Board members whispered among themselves, journalists scribbled frantically, and live streams carried Emily's words to thousands. He saw his own security team watching her with grudging admiration, but every word she spoke hammered at the secret he carried. The confrontation reached its peak when Emily pulled out her mother's locket. "This is my only connection to my past, Mr. Wilson. A piece of silver and a faded photograph. But Hope's Haven gave me a future. You're not just demolishing a building, you're erasing the only home many of us have ever known." Richard Hayes tried to intervene, signaling security, but Marcus waved them off. Something in Emily's passion reminded him so much of Sarah, the same fire, the same unflinching courage. He watched his daughter defend her home, knowing he was the threat she was fighting against. "Your modernization plan," Emily continued, her voice breaking slightly, "speaks about improved outcomes and standardized care protocols, but children aren't products to be optimized. We're not asking for state-of-the-art facilities, we're begging you to understand that love doesn't need upgrading." The room erupted in applause, led by parents who had adopted from Hope's Haven. Journalists shouted questions, cameras flashed, and social media exploded with clips of Emily's speech. Marcus stood frozen, torn between his corporate responsibilities and the desperate need to tell Emily the truth. The confrontation ended with Emily's quiet challenge. "Mr. Wilson, I invite you to spend 1 week at Hope's Haven, not as a CEO, not as a developer, but as a witness to what really matters. Maybe then you'll understand what you're really destroying." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving Marcus staring after her, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Jennifer Parker's resignation letter landed on Marcus's desk the morning after the town hall confrontation. Attached was a stack of yellowed envelopes, 22 years of Sarah Collins's attempts to reach him, each marked "returned to sender" in Jennifer's precise handwriting. The oldest letter, dated August 2002, still bore traces of tears on its wrinkled surface. With trembling hands, Marcus opened the first envelope. Sarah's familiar handwriting flowed across the page. "Dear Marcus, by the time you read this, our daughter will be 3 months old. I named her Emily, after your grandmother." The letter slipped from his grasp as decades of carefully constructed walls crumbled around him. Each subsequent letter told the story of their daughter's milestones. Emily took her first steps today, one read. "She has your determination, Marcus. 3 falls and still she kept trying." Another, "She's 5 now and already showing artistic talent. I see you in her focus, the way she furrows her brow when concentrating." Jennifer's betrayal ran deep. She had intercepted every letter, every attempt at connection, believing she was protecting Marcus's rising empire from what she saw as a potential scandal. Her own letter of resignation explained her actions. "I thought I was protecting your interests, Mr. Wilson. I never imagined the weight of the secret I would carry." As Marcus read through the letters chronologically, Sarah's journey unfolded before him. Her early hopes of reconciliation gave way to updates about Emily's life, then to revelations about her own illness. The final letter, written from her hospital bed, contained a key to a storage unit where she had kept everything she wanted Emily to have. The discovery sent Marcus into a spiral of rage and regret. He remembered countless moments when Jennifer had protected him from interruptions, screened his calls, and managed his correspondence. How many other lives had been altered by her well-intentioned interference? The weight of lost opportunities crashed down on him. Security footage showed Jennifer systematically intercepting Sarah's letters over the years, carefully logging each one before filing them away. She had created a detailed record of her deception, perhaps driven by guilt or a misguided sense of duty. The footage showed her sometimes lingering over the letters, reading them before sending them back. Among the letters was a small diary, where Sarah had documented her decision-making process. "Marcus is on the verge of something revolutionary," she wrote. "Our love story was beautiful, but his destiny is bigger than us. I choose to step aside, but I'll make sure Emily knows she comes from love." The entry was dated just days before she left. The most devastating letter was dated the week before Sarah's death. "Marcus, I don't have much time left. Emily is everything we could have hoped for in a daughter. She has your business sense, believe it or not, organized a fundraiser for art supplies that would have made you proud. I'm leaving her everything I have, which isn't much, but includes the truth about her father. Whether she chooses to find you will be her decision." Marcus called an emergency board meeting, his voice shaking with barely contained fury as he addressed his executives. He revealed Jennifer's actions, the years of intercepted letters, and announced an immediate internal investigation into any other potential interference with his personal correspondence. The boardroom fell silent as he placed Sarah's letters on the table. Jennifer Parker sat across from investigators in a sterile conference room, her perfectly manicured hands folded over a thick folder of confessions. "I started working for Mr. Wilson when he was just beginning to make headlines," she explained, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. "The first letter from Sarah Collins arrived the same week we landed the Henderson contract, the deal that put Wilson Enterprises on the map. The investigation revealed a pattern spanning 2 decades. Jennifer had created an elaborate filing system for the intercepted correspondence, each letter carefully documented and stored. She had even kept a separate diary detailing her justifications. March 15, 2003, another letter from SC. Mr. Wilson is negotiating the European expansion. Can't risk distraction. Return to sender." Her protective deception extended beyond just the letters. She had redirected Sarah's phone calls, blocked her email addresses, and even once turned her away from the office, claiming Marcus was permanently unavailable. "I convinced myself I was protecting his legacy," Jennifer admitted, her composure finally cracking. "Every time I saw his name in Forbes or Fortune, I told myself I had made the right choice." The scope of her interference became clear as more evidence emerged. She had maintained a surveillance file on both Sarah and Emily, tracking their movements through private investigators. Reports showed she had quietly intervened when Sarah tried to attend company events, ensuring their paths never crossed. She had even manipulated Marcus's schedule when he had unknowingly been near Hope's Haven over the years. Most damning was her handling of Sarah's final attempts to reach Marcus. Hospital records showed Sarah had called Wilson Enterprises daily during her last week, each call meticulously logged and deflected by Jennifer. "Tell him it's about his daughter," Sarah had begged. Jennifer's notes from that day read, "Subject becoming desperate. Increased security protocols." The psychological assessment ordered by the investigation painted a complex picture. Jennifer had developed an almost maternal obsession with protecting Marcus's success. Her own childhood in foster care had left her with deep-seated issues about family stability. She saw herself as the guardian of Marcus's destiny, willing to sacrifice others' happiness for what she perceived as the greater good. When confronted with the full impact of her actions, Jennifer broke down. "I watched Emily grow up through these letters," she sobbed, pulling out a hidden album of newspaper clippings about Hope's Haven. "I told myself she was better off without the complications of Marcus's world. I convinced myself I was protecting everyone." The legal implications were severe. Interfering with private correspondence, unauthorized surveillance, and criminal conspiracy charges loomed, but the emotional damage far outweighed any legal consequences. Jennifer had single-handedly orchestrated the separation of a father from his daughter, altered the course of multiple lives, and betrayed the trust of the man she had dedicated her life to protecting. The final piece of evidence was perhaps the most heartbreaking, a letter Jennifer had written but never sent to Emily on her 18th birthday. "Your father is a great man," it read, "and I have spent 20 years ensuring he remained great. Perhaps that greatness came at too high a price. The weight of this secret has become my cross to bear." As the investigation concluded, Jennifer made one last request to apologize to Emily in person. The request was denied, but she resigned from Wilson Enterprises, her 2 decades of service ending not with a celebration but with a quiet escort from the building, carrying only a small box of personal items and the crushing weight of her choices. The Wilson Enterprises Emergency Board meeting stretched into its 6th hour as Marcus Wilson faced the fight of his corporate life. The massive mahogany table, usually a symbol of his power, now felt like an execution block. Richard Hayes, flanked by concerned board members, led the opposition to Marcus's sudden reversal on the Hope's Haven project. "Let me get this straight," Hayes leaned forward, his voice dripping with barely concealed contempt. "You want to abandon a $200 million development project, already announced to shareholders because of some old letters and a personal connection to one orphanage." The room tensed as other board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Marcus stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled over Manhattan. "I'm not abandoning the project," he turned to face his board. "I'm transforming it. The current plan is fundamentally flawed. We've been measuring success in square footage and efficiency metrics while missing the human element entirely." The presentation screens flickered to life as Marcus unveiled his new vision. Instead of demolishing Hope's Haven, he proposed a hybrid model preserving the historic building while modernizing its infrastructure. The surrounding land would be developed into satellite facilities, each maintaining the intimate scale that made Hope's Haven successful. "This is business suicide," Hayes interrupted, slamming his hand on the table. "We have investors expecting returns, contractors with signed agreements, zoning approvals that took months to secure. And you want to throw it all away because you discovered you have a long-lost daughter." The word daughter echoed through the boardroom, causing several members to gasp. Marcus had kept Emily's identity private, but Hayes' investigative team had connected the dots. "Yes." Marcus replied quietly, "I have a daughter I never knew about, but this isn't about Emily. This is about recognizing that our corporate responsibility extends beyond profit margins." The CFO, Janet Matthews, cleared her throat. "The numbers on your new proposal actually show promise," she noted, scanning through the documents. "By preserving the existing structure, we save on demolition costs. The phased development approach reduces initial capital requirements, and the goodwill value, potentially priceless." The battle lines were drawn as board members took sides. The younger executives, many with families of their own, saw the merit in Marcus's humanitarian approach. The old guard, led by Hayes, clung to the original profit-driven plan. The debate raged over legal implications, shareholder responsibilities, and corporate image. Marcus saved his strongest argument for last. 20 years ago, I stood in this room and promised to build a company that would change lives. We've succeeded beyond our wildest dreams, but somewhere along the way we forgot why we started. Hope's Haven isn't just an old building, it's a testament to what we claim to value: innovation, community, and human potential. Hayes played his final card. "The board can vote to remove you as CEO," he threatened. "Your personal involvement compromises your judgment. We have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Marcus smiled for the first time that day. "You're right, Richard. Call the vote. But first, let me remind you who holds controlling interest in this company. I built Wilson Enterprises from nothing. I've led us through 3 recessions and 2 market crashes. My compromised judgment has made everyone in this room wealthy beyond their dreams." The tension broke as several board members chuckled. They had seen this side of Marcus before, the stubborn entrepreneur who had transformed a small tech startup into a global empire. Hayes' face reddened as he realized he had overplayed his hand. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued, his voice steady. "We're going to announce a new initiative in corporate responsibility, starting with Hope's Haven. We'll bring in child development experts, work with the current staff, and create a model that other institutions can follow. And Richard, We're going to make it profitable." The final vote wasn't even close. Hayes and 2 others opposed, while the remaining 12 board members sided with Marcus. As the room cleared, Janet Matthews lingered. "Your daughter," she said softly. "She's the one who spoke at the town hall, isn't she? She has your spirit." Marcus nodded, gathering his papers. "She has had the basement of St. Michael's Church hummed with tension as Hope's Heaven's fate split the community down the middle. On one side sat the modernization supporters, armed with statistics and development plans. On the other, preservation advocates clutched photographs and emotional testimonials. The town hall meeting had become ground zero for a larger debate about progress versus tradition. Mayor Thompson called for order as voices rose. "We need to hear all sides," she insisted, her gavel competing with heated arguments. Local business owners saw the Wilson development as an economic opportunity. Real estate agents spoke of increased property values. Urban planners praised the proposed facility's efficiency. But then Rose Martinez, owner of the corner grocery store, took the microphone. "For 20 years I've watched Hope's Haven kids grow up," her voice trembled. "Every morning they stop by for fruit on their way to school. I know their names, their stories, their favorite snacks. Will the new facility's corporate cafeteria remember that Tommy needs his orange cut into 6 pieces? Or that Sarah only eats green apples?" The divide deepened as more community members spoke. Dr. James Peterson, Chief of Pediatrics at City General, presented studies supporting institutional care. Modern facilities mean better health monitoring, improved nutrition, standardized psychological care, he argued. His PowerPoint slides showed impressive statistics from similar modernization projects. But Mrs. Thompson's rebuttal struck a deeper chord. She brought Tommy to the podium, the once mute boy who now spoke clearly about his journey. "The big hospitals couldn't help me talk," he said simply. But Miss Emmy and the art room did. The room fell silent as he held up a painting of Hope's Haven, the old Victorian mansion glowing with warm colors. The local paper's editorial page became a battleground. "Progress demands change," argued one headline. "Heart over hardware," countered another. Letters to the editor poured in from across the state. Former residents wrote about Hope's Haven's impact on their lives. Business leaders detailed the economic benefits of Wilson's original plan. The controversy attracted national attention. Cable news crews set up outside Hope's Haven, their lights illuminating the garden where Emily still tended her mother's roses. Some saw the battle as a symbol of broader social issues: tradition versus progress, humanity versus efficiency, heart versus spreadsheet. Social media exploded with competing hashtags. Save a Peace Haven trended against Modernize Care. Local teenagers organized Instagram live streams from the orphanage, showing daily life that contradicted the outdated facility narrative. Corporate supporters countered with slick videos about the proposed amenities. The division affected unexpected places. The annual Community Festival Committee split over whether to honor Wilson Enterprises sponsorship. Church congregations debated the moral implications during coffee hour. Even the local diner saw regular customers choosing different sections based on their stance. Yet amid the conflict, something extraordinary happened. People began really talking about childcare. Suburban mothers invited Hope's Haven kids for playdates. Local teachers offered free tutoring. The community college proposed partnership programs. The very debate about the orphanage's fate had awakened a deeper awareness of collective responsibility. In the garden, Emily found unlikely allies. Conservative business owners who opposed the modernization plan based on historic preservation joined forces with liberal activists fighting corporate expansion. Their shared love for the old mansion transcended political divides. The children of Hope's Haven watched it all with mixed emotions. Some dreamed of private rooms and new computers. Others feared losing the only home they'd known. In art therapy, their paintings reflected this duality: modern buildings overlaid with memories of cookie-scented kitchens and creaky stairs. "Our mother's heart," he replied. and she's about to teach this company more about value than any spreadsheet ever could. Emily Anderson's phone buzzed with another warning from the state education department. Her outspoken opposition to Wilson Enterprises had drawn attention from powerful people, and now her teaching license hung by a thread. Anonymous complaints cited unprofessional conduct and misuse of educational platforms for personal activism. Her hands trembled as she read the latest email, but her resolve remained unshaken. David Mitchell discovered the pressure campaign first. Corporate donors had begun withdrawing support from programs that employed Emily. Grant applications were mysteriously denied. Even her part-time position at the community college faced sudden budget review. Through it all, Emily continued teaching her art classes at Hope's Haven, refusing to be silenced. Support emerged from unexpected quarters. A prominent civil rights attorney, Sandra Rodriguez, offered to represent Emily pro bono. "They're trying to make an example of you," Sandra explained during a late-night strategy session. "But we'll make an example of them." Instead, teachers' unions across the state began rallying behind Emily, recognizing the dangerous precedent of corporate interference in education. Local parents organized a letter-writing campaign to the education department. Their testimonials spoke of Emily's impact on their children, how she had helped anxious kids find confidence through art, how she worked overtime without pay to prepare students for college interviews, how she created safe spaces for troubled teens to express themselves. The pressure took its toll privately. Emily's savings dwindled as legal fees mounted. She sold her car, moved to a cheaper apartment, and picked up weekend work at an art supply store. Yet each morning, she arrived at Hope's Haven with a smile, determined not to let the children see her struggle. They needed stability now more than ever. Mrs. Thompson watched Emily with growing concern. "Your mother had the same fire," she said one evening, not knowing the weight of her words. "She would have been proud of how you're fighting for these children." Emily clutched her locket, drawing strength from the only connection to her unknown mother. The art room became a sanctuary of resistance. Emily's students created a mural of Hope's Haven's history, each panel telling a story of lives transformed within its walls. When education officials came to observe her classes, they found children engaged in art therapy sessions that were technically outside their jurisdiction to regulate. Professional colleagues rallied around her. Art therapists provided documentation supporting her methods. Child psychologists wrote papers about the importance of stability in orphanage settings. Even competing orphanages spoke up, warning about the dangers of prioritizing modernization over proven care methods. Emily's former students began showing up to support her. College students skipped classes to attend hearings. Working professionals took days off to testify about her influence on their lives. A successful gallery owner offered Emily a prestigious position, but she declined. "My place is here," she said simply, "with the children who need me." The media attention grew. Local news covered the story of the dedicated teacher fighting corporate interests. National education blogs picked up the narrative. Social media campaigns highlighted the broader implications of corporate influence in childcare and education. Through it all, Emily kept teaching, kept fighting, kept believing. The discovery came during a routine audit of Hope's Haven's financial records. Mrs. Thompson sat in her office, surrounded by decades of donation receipts, when she noticed a pattern. Monthly contributions, small but consistent, spanning 20 years under different names, but all bearing the same distinctive handwriting. Sarah Collins had been quietly supporting the orphanage from the shadows. Mrs. Thompson's hands shook as she pieced together the story through faded bank statements and thank you letters. Sarah had worked multiple jobs, sold paintings, taught extra classes, all to ensure a steady flow of support to Hope's Haven. Even during her illness, the donations never stopped. She had lived in a tiny apartment, foregone medical treatments, all to keep her daughter's home financially afloat. The revelation deepened when they found Sarah's hidden account books in the garden shed. She had calculated every penny, often going without food to make her monthly contribution. Notes in the margins told a story of sacrifice: skipped doctor's appointment, Hope's Haven needs new winter coats. Sold Mom's Ring Children's Christmas Fund, working double shifts, Emily's art supplies. Emily sat in Mrs. Thompson's office, surrounded by evidence of her mother's secret life of sacrifice. Each receipt, each careful notation, revealed a love so deep it transcended absence. The woman she had believed abandoned her had actually been Hope's Haven's most faithful supporter, working herself to death to ensure her daughter's welfare. The financial records revealed more. Sarah had established a small trust fund, accumulated through years of overtime work, designated for Hope's Haven's art program. She had negotiated with art supply stores for donations, organized community fundraisers under assumed names, and even sold her own artwork anonymously to support the orphanage. The scope of Sarah's contributions became clear as they dug deeper. During Hope's Haven's financial crisis of 2010, an anonymous donor had provided crucial funding to keep the doors open. Bank records now showed it was Sarah who had sold her small house and moved into a studio apartment to raise the money. She had lived in near poverty while ensuring her daughter's home remained stable. Mrs. Thompson finally shared the letters Sarah had written over the years. Keep the art room open, she had begged in one. It's where Emily finds her peace. Another contained detailed observations about her daughter from afar. I saw her teaching younger children today. She has such gentle hands with them. Please never tell her I was watching. The most heartbreaking discovery was a series of birthday cards Sarah had written but never sent. Each contained a small drawing and a message of love, along with a portion of her monthly salary. She had documented Emily's entire life from a distance, celebrating every milestone while remaining invisible. Local journalists began unraveling Sarah's story. Former colleagues spoke of her relentless work ethic, never understanding why such a talented artist lived so modestly. Art students remembered her insistence on donating proceeds from exhibitions to children's charities. Hospital staff recalled her refusing expensive treatments, saying she had more important obligations. The final piece emerged when they found Sarah's last letter to Mrs. Thompson, written days before her death. I couldn't be the mother Emily deserved, she had written, but I could ensure she always had a home. Perhaps someday she'll understand that leaving her at Hope's Haven wasn't abandonment, it was the only way I could give her everything she needed. The money I saved on my treatments will keep the art program running for another 5 years. Tell her, when the time is right, that every sacrifice was a privilege, every donation an act of love. The press conference room at Wilson Tower fell silent as Marcus Wilson approached the podium. Outside, protesters and supporters alike pressed against barriers, their competing chants muted by thick glass. The world's business media had gathered, expecting an announcement about the Hope's Haven development project. Instead, they witnessed a moment that would redefine corporate America's understanding of social responsibility. 22 years ago, Marcus began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I was a young entrepreneur with big dreams and empty pockets. I fell in love with an artist named Sarah Collins. He paused, letting the unexpected personal revelation sink in. 3 months after she disappeared from my life, she gave birth to our daughter. The room erupted in chaos as reporters jumped to their feet, cameras flashing like lightning. Marcus held up a hand, continuing over their shouts. That daughter grew up to become Emily Anderson, the young teacher who stood in this very room last week and taught me the true meaning of value. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus projected Sarah's letters onto the massive screens behind him. These letters were intercepted by my former secretary, hiding the truth for over 2 decades. While I built this empire, Sarah sacrificed everything to support our daughter from the shadows. She died never knowing I would have moved heaven and earth to be part of Emily's life. Journalists frantically typed as Marcus revealed the full story: Sarah's secret contributions to Hope's Haven, her battle with illness, her unwavering devotion to their daughter. He spoke of Jennifer Parker's deception, his own ignorance, and the cruel irony of nearly destroying the very home his daughter's mother had worked so hard to preserve. "I stand before you not just as CEO of Wilson Enterprises," Marcus continued, his voice breaking slightly, "but as a father who lost 22 years with his daughter. I can't reclaim that time, but I can honor both Emily and Sarah's legacy." He unveiled new architectural plans showing Hope's Haven preserved at the heart of a revolutionary childcare complex. The corporate stakeholders in the room shifted uncomfortably as Marcus announced the creation of the Sarah Collins Foundation, funded with $5 billion of his personal wealth. This foundation will support orphanages that prioritize the human touch over institutional efficiency. Every facility will include an art therapy program, carrying forward Sarah's belief in healing through creativity. Emily, watching the broadcast from Hope's Haven's common room, clutched her mother's locket as her world tilted on its axis. The children gathered around her, instinctively offering comfort as their teacher absorbed the truth about her origins. Mrs. Thompson held her hand, finally able to share stories of Sarah's secret visits and silent sacrifices. The press conference reached its emotional peak when Marcus addressed his daughter directly through the cameras. "Emily, I know this truth comes with pain and questions. I can't undo the past, but I can promise you this: every value you fight for, every principle you defend, will become the cornerstone of Wilson Enterprises' future. Your mother's spirit of sacrifice and your passion for nurturing children will guide us forward." As Marcus stepped away from the podium, the business world struggled to process this unprecedented merger of corporate power and personal redemption. Stock analysts debated the implications, while human interest reporters rushed to document the story of 3 lives shaped by love, sacrifice, and destiny's long arc toward justice. The story exploded across global media platforms with unprecedented force. Billionaire's lost daughter found in orphanage he planned to demolish screamed the headlines. News vans clogged the streets around Hope's Haven while drones buzzed overhead, trying to capture footage of Emily. Social media erupted with hashtags ranging from Wilson family to Hope's Haven miracle. Corporate reaction was swift and divided. Wilson Enterprises stock initially plunged as investors panicked over Marcus's apparent emotional decision-making. Richard Hayes led a group of dissenting board members in a public statement, questioning Marcus's fitness to lead. Competing developers seized the opportunity to criticize the company's sudden shift in strategy. Emily faced her own media siege. Reporters ambushed her outside Hope's Haven, thrusting microphones in her face and shouting questions about her newfound father. Paparazzi followed her grocery shopping, documenting her modest lifestyle. Tabloids dug into her past, interviewing everyone from her college roommates to her local barista, all seeking insights into the orphan billionaire's daughter. Financial analysts debated the implications on major networks. Some praised Marcus's vision of socially conscious corporate leadership, while others predicted doom for Wilson Enterprises. You can't run a Fortune 500 company on feelings, declared one prominent investor on CNN. CNBC ran an hour-long special titled, "When Personal Meets Professional: The Wilson Crisis." Inside Hope's Haven, the children absorbed the chaos in their own way. They drew pictures of news helicopters and played at being reporters during recess. The older ones fiercely protected Emily, forming human shields when she walked to her car. Tommy, still struggling with speech, simply hugged her each morning and whispered, "Still I'll miss Emmy." The Sarah Collins story took on a life of its own. Art critics re-evaluated her work, suddenly discovering profound meaning in paintings they had previously ignored. Her small studio was declared a historic site. Former students came forward with stories of her generosity, revealing how she had secretly paid for their art supplies or covered their tuition. Wilson Enterprises' Puerto Rico team worked overtime managing the crisis. They crafted a narrative of corporate redemption, positioning the company as a pioneer in humanitarian capitalism. Marketing experts praised the authenticity of the story while crisis managers scrambled to reassure shareholders. The company's social media channels were flooded with both support and criticism. Legal experts speculated about potential shareholder lawsuits, while business schools rushed to develop case studies about the situation. Harvard Business Review published an article titled "The Wilson Paradigm: When Personal Values Disrupt Corporate Strategy." Ethics professors debated the boundaries between professional duty and moral obligation. Celebrity reactions added another layer of complexity. Movie stars tweeted their support for Emily, while business moguls questioned Marcus's judgment. Talk shows debated the story from every angle as a corporate drama, a family reunion, a critique of modern orphanage systems, and a testament to maternal love. Through it all, Emily maintained her teaching schedule, trying to provide stability for her students amid the chaos. She declined all interview requests, issued no statements, and focused on protecting her kids from the media circus. Her only public response was a simple sign posted on Hopeshaven's gate: "This is still a home. Please respect our children's privacy." "I don't want your money, your name, or your guilt," Emily's words cut through the silence of Marcus's penthouse office. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her mother's locket gleaming in the afternoon sun. "You didn't just miss 22 years of my life, Mr. Wilson. You were about to destroy the only home I've ever known." Marcus reached for the stack of Sarah's letters on his desk, but Emily held up her hand. "Those letters don't change anything. Mom made her choice to protect me from your world. She worked herself to death ensuring I had a real home, not just a fancy address. And now you think you can swoop in with your billions and make everything right." The pain in her voice matched the ache in Marcus's chest. He watched her examine the photographs on his wall magazine covers chronicling his rise to success, each one representing a moment he could have been with his daughter instead. "While you were building your empire," Emily continued, "Mom was skipping meals to send money to Hope's Haven. While you were buying penthouses, she was selling her paintings at street fairs to fund our art program." The city sprawled below them, a testament to Wilson Enterprises' success. But Emily saw only the invisible lines connecting wealth to poverty, power to powerlessness. "Do you know what it's like?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To spend every birthday wondering if your parents might show up? To watch other kids get adopted while you cling to a locket and a faded photograph?" Marcus stepped toward her, but Emily backed away. "I've read the press releases about your grand plans for Hope's Haven. Modern facilities, professional staff, efficient systems. But children don't need efficiency, Mr. Wilson. They need what Mom understood: love, stability, and a chance to heal in their own way, at their own pace." Tears streamed down her face as she pulled out a crumpled drawing, her first artwork from Hope's Haven. Mrs. Thompson kept this. A 5-year-old's crayon drawing of a family. Know what she told me? That family isn't about blood or money. It's about who shows up, day after day, through nightmares and triumphs. "Emily, please," Marcus began, but she cut him off. "No, you don't get to play father now. Not after trying to bulldoze everything Mum sacrificed for. Not after treating Hope's Haven like just another property to develop. Those children you wanted to relocate? They're my family. The staff you planned to replace? They raised me when you didn't." She placed her hand on the window, looking down at the tiny figures moving through the streets below. "Your world up here, making decisions that affect people's lives without ever really seeing them, that's exactly what Mom protected me from. She taught me through her sacrifice that real value isn't in stock prices or property development. It's in the moments you choose love over profit." Marcus watched helplessly as his daughter walked toward the door. She paused, hand on the handle. "I appreciate that you've changed the development plans. Thank you for that. But don't expect me to suddenly become the daughter you can parade at charity galas. I am my mother's daughter, and her legacy of quiet sacrifice means more to me than your empire ever could." The door closed softly behind her, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of her rejection and the realization that some damages couldn't be repaired with money or power. The morning they closed Hope's Haven's doors felt like a funeral. Despite Marcus's revised plans, City inspectors had declared the old building unsafe after a partial roof collapse during autumn storms. The yellow tape crossed the entrance where generations of children had found sanctuary, and moving trucks lined the quiet street. Mrs. Thompson stood on the front steps, clutching the ancient ledger containing decades of Hope's Haven's history. The children were being temporarily relocated to 3 different facilities across the city, a necessary division that felt like tearing apart a family. Emily moved between groups, trying to maintain a brave face as she helped pack treasured belongings and promised tearful children they would reunite soon. Tommy refused to leave the art room, barricading himself behind easels until Emily crawled in beside him. "The new place won't have our paint smells," he whispered, reverting to the selective mutism that had plagued his early years. Emily held him close, understanding that for children like Tommy, every change felt like another abandonment. The garden proved the most heartbreaking to leave. Emily and a group of older children carefully dug up Sarah's roses, packing them in damp newspaper with hopes of replanting them once renovations were complete. Each flower represented a secret visit from a mother Emily had never known, a legacy of love hidden in plain sight. Inside, the halls echoed with the sounds of dismantling. Workers carefully removed children's artwork from walls, cataloguing each piece for eventual return. The kitchen, where Cook Martha had prepared thousands of comfort meals, stood silent. The creaky third step, which had announced countless midnight snack raids, gave one last groan as movers carried out furniture. Social workers supervised the separations, trying to keep friend groups together where possible. Maria clung to her best friend Sophie as different vans arrived to take them to separate facilities. "Promise you won't forget me," she begged, echoing the fear that haunted every child who had ever passed through these doors, the fear of being forgotten. Mrs. Thompson's office, the heart of Hope's Haven's operations, took the longest to pack. Every drawer contained memories, photographs of former residents' graduations, letters from successful adoptees, small treasures children had gifted her over the years. Each item had to be carefully wrapped, not just in bubble wrap, but in the love that had preserved them for decades. The staff gathered for one last meeting in the common room, sitting in a circle on the floor since the furniture had been removed. They shared memories, made plans for staying in touch with their scattered charges, and promised to return when the renovation was complete. Emily couldn't help but notice how the room's emptiness amplified their quiet sobs. As twilight approached, only Emily, Mrs. Thompson, and a few long-term residents remained. They walked through each room, saying goodbye to the spaces that had witnessed countless transformations. In the library, they found books with children's names written inside covers. In the dormitories, height marks on doorframes chronicled years of growth. The final moment came as Mrs. Thompson locked the front door, her hands shaking so badly that Emily had to help turn the key. They stood in silence, watching the sunset paint the old Victorian windows gold, the same view that had greeted Sarah during her secret visits, that had welcomed generations of lost children home. Marcus Wilson's resignation letter sat unsigned on his desk at Wilson Tower as dawn broke over Manhattan. After Emily's rejection and Hope's Haven's closure, something fundamental had broken inside him. The empire he'd built, once a testament to his vision, now felt like a monument to his failures. The media vultures circled as rumors of his mental state spread through corporate channels. Richard Hayes had already begun positioning himself as the natural successor, presenting himself to shareholders as the steady hand needed to guide Wilson Enterprises back to its profit-focused roots. The stock price rallied at each hint of Marcus's departure. Alone in his penthouse, Marcus surrounded himself with Sarah's letters and photographs of Emily growing up at Hope's Haven. The contrast between his luxury apartment and Sarah's modest life haunted him. While he had been collecting art as investment pieces, she had been selling her paintings to support their daughter. His walls of awards now seemed to mock every sacrifice she had made. He stopped attending board meetings, sending brief emails instead. His executive assistant found him one morning in his office, staring at old photographs of the Morning Brew Cafe where he had first met Sarah. The mighty Marcus Wilson, who had once commanded rooms with his presence, now wandered his own building like a ghost, barely acknowledging the concerned whispers that followed him. The corporate jet remained grounded, his calendar cleared. Instead of flying to global conferences, he spent hours driving past Hope's Haven, watching the renovation crews work on the building that had shaped his daughter's life. Sometimes he would park across the street, imagining Sarah doing the same years ago, both of them loving Emily from a distance. His therapist suggested he was experiencing delayed grief, not just for the years lost with Emily, but for Sarah and the life they could have shared. The business magazines that had once praised his vision now ran speculation pieces about his stability. Wilson's fall, when personal crisis meets corporate leadership, became the talk of Wall Street. He began making impulsive donations to small orphanages and art programs, trying to retroactively honor Sarah's legacy. His financial advisors warned him about the pace of his giving, but numbers had lost their meaning to him. In one particularly dark moment, he nearly signed over his entire fortune to children's charities before his lawyers intervened. The final straw came during a rare public appearance at a charity gala. When a well-meaning board member suggested using Emily's story in their marketing materials, Marcus exploded in a rage that shocked the city's elite. A video of the incident went viral, leading to emergency board meetings and concerned calls from major investors. In his private journal, Marcus wrote words he could never share publicly. "I built an empire on the premise that everything has a price, that efficiency trumps emotion." Sarah knew better. She understood that love's value can't be calculated, that a child's healing doesn't follow a business plan. "I succeeded in everything except what mattered most." The night before he planned to sign his resignation, Marcus found himself at the Morning Brew Cafe's old location, now an upscale boutique. Standing there, he finally understood that stepping down from Wilson Enterprises wasn't an ending, it was his first step toward finding what Sarah had known all along, that true worth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the lives we touch and the love we share. During the renovation of Hope's Haven, workers discovered a hidden grotto behind the overgrown rose garden. Nestled among Sarah's carefully tended flowers stood a small stone angel weathered by years of silent vigil. At its feet lay a waterproof chest containing Sarah's most precious secrets, protected by prayers and providence. Emily knelt before the discovery, her mother's locket warm against her chest. The workers had called her immediately, recognizing the significance of their find. The angel's serene face seemed to hold the same gentle expression Emily had seen in her mother's photographs, as if Sarah had chosen this guardian specifically for her legacy. Inside the chest, wrapped in oilcloth and preserved by faith and time, lay Sarah's private journal. Its pages revealed not just her story, but her deep spiritual journey through hardship. "God gave me strength when I had none," she had written. "Each rose I plant is a prayer for Emily's future, each petal a promise that love never truly leaves." The garden, it turned out, was more than just a refuge. Sarah had designed it as a living message, each plant chosen with purpose. The roses formed a perfect circle representing, her journal explained, the eternal nature of a mother's love. At the circle's heart, she had planted Emily's birth flower, tending it through every season as she watched her daughter grow from afar. Mrs. Thompson joined Emily as she explored her mother's sanctuary. "Your mother would come here late at night," she revealed after her hospital treatments. "She'd tend the roses and pray, asking God to give you the strength she feared she couldn't provide. Even in her final days, she believed this garden would somehow bridge the distance between you." The workers found small treasures buried beneath each rosebush time capsules Sarah had planted throughout Emily's childhood. Each contained artifacts of her daughter's life, report cards secretly obtained, photographs taken from a distance, pressed flowers from every birthday. Beneath the central bush, they discovered Sarah's most precious mementos, the hospital bracelet from Emily's birth and a tiny silver cross that matched the one in Emily's locket. Sarah's final journal entry spoke of divine timing. I may not understand God's plan, but I trust that someday when Emily finds this place, she'll understand that she was never abandoned. Love, like faith, sometimes works in hidden ways. These roses will bloom long after I'm gone, carrying the message my words could never fully express. The garden's discovery brought an unexpected peace to Emily's turbulent heart. Standing among her mother's roses beneath the watchful eyes of the stone angel, she felt a connection transcending time and loss. The gentle breeze carrying the rose's fragrance seemed to whisper of love's endurance, of faith's quiet strength. Marcus, invited to witness the discovery, stood at the garden's edge, understanding finally the profound difference between his world of concrete and steel and Sarah's realm of growing things and grace. The garden stood as testament to a different kind of wealth, one measured in prayers and patience, in love planted and tended through seasons of hardship and hope. The most remarkable discovery lay beneath the largest rose bush in Sarah's garden. Construction workers, carefully transplanting the mature plant, unearthed the vintage silver chest, its surface etched with Emily's name and birth date. Inside, Sarah had created an intricate timeline of her daughter's life, each artifact carefully preserved with a mother's tender devotion. Layer by layer, the time capsule revealed its treasures. The topmost items were recent newspaper clippings of Emily's community work, photographs taken from a distance at her college graduation. Beneath these lay earlier memories, a program from her high school art show, dried flowers from her first teaching job, small sketches of Emily at various ages drawn by Sarah's talented hand. Deeper in the chest, they found evidence of Sarah's constant presence in Emily's life. A collection of Emily's artwork, secretly retrieved from Hope's Heaven's annual displays. Report cards and achievement certificates, carefully preserved. Even a recording of Emily's first public speech at a school event, captured from the back of the audience by a mother who could only love from afar. The most poignant items lay at the bottom. Emily's hospital bracelet nested beside Sarah's own, a tiny pair of paint-stained baby shoes, the first drawing Emily had ever created, rescued from a classroom display. Each item was accompanied by Sarah's handwritten notes, documenting not just the artifact but the emotions behind it. Emily's first self-portrait, she has her father's determined expression. My heart nearly burst with pride. Mrs. Thompson watched as Emily discovered a series of sealed letters, each marked with a specific date or milestone for your wedding day, when you become a mother, when you need to remember how much you are loved. Sarah had thought of everything, preparing messages to guide her daughter through life's pivotal moments, even after she was gone. The final item was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Sarah's thoughts, prayers, and dreams for her daughter. The last entry, dated just days before her death, read, "My dearest Emily, by the time you find this, you'll understand that leaving you at Hope's Haven wasn't an end but a beginning. Every rose in this garden represents a day I watched over you. Every thorn a reminder of the pain of our separation. But like these flowers, love continues to bloom, even in the harshest seasons." As Emily and Marcus sat in Mrs. Thompson's office, surrounded by the contents of Sarah's time capsule, the full extent of her sacrifices emerged through a trail of medical bills, work schedules, and personal diaries. Sarah had worked 3 jobs simultaneously, teaching art during the day, waitressing at night, and selling paintings on weekends. Every extra dollar went to Hope's Haven, carefully documented in a small red ledger. The evidence of her declining health was scattered throughout her journals. Doctors' notes recommended immediate treatment, which Sarah had postponed repeatedly. Can't afford both treatment and Lily's art supplies, she had written. The choice is simple, her future matters more than my present. Even as her condition worsened, she maintained her secret vigil, watching Emily's dance recitals from the back row, attending school performances in disguise. bank statements revealed how Sarah had lived in near poverty despite her talent as an artist. She had sold her house, moved into a tiny studio apartment, and even pawned her family heirlooms. Yet her contributions to Hope's Haven never faltered. During financial crises, she had anonymously provided emergency funding, ensuring the orphanage remained open when other institutions closed. Mrs. Thompson shared security footage from years past, showing Sarah's nighttime visits to the garden. Even during her final months weakened by illness, she had continued tending the roses, leaving small gifts for Emily hidden among the flowers. The footage showed her speaking softly to the plants, sharing stories about her daughter's accomplishments, praying for her future. The most heartbreaking discovery was Sarah's collection of unsent birthday cards, 22 years of love and longing, each expressing the agony of watching her daughter grow up from a distance. The final card, written from her hospital bed, contained a confession: "I thought keeping you from Marcus's world of wealth and power would protect you. Perhaps I was wrong, but every sacrifice was worth it to ensure you grew up surrounded by genuine love instead of golden cages." A letter from Sarah's oncologist revealed the ultimate sacrifice. She had refused an experimental treatment that might have saved her life because it would have meant stopping her financial support of Hope's Haven. "Some things are worth dying for," she had written in her diary. "My daughter's home is one of them." Marcus stood before the renovated Hope's Haven, watching the morning sun illuminate its restored Victorian facade. The building now represented a perfect fusion of past and future historically preserved exterior housing, state-of-the-art facilities within. But his most innovative solution wasn't in the architecture, it was in the complete reimagining of how the orphanage would operate. Instead of replacing Hope's Haven staff with corporate professionals, Marcus had created a hybrid system. Mrs. Thompson retained her position as director, while new specialists worked under her guidance, learning the personal touch that made Hope's Haven special. The kitchen still belonged to Cook Martha, but now she had modern equipment and trained assistants to help prepare her legendary comfort foods. The art room, Emily's sanctuary, had been expanded into a full therapeutic arts center. Sarah's teaching philosophy became its foundation, with Emily leading a team of art therapists. The walls displayed a carefully preserved collection of children's artwork from throughout Hope's Haven's history, including pieces from Sarah's time teaching there. Marcus transformed the garden into a memorial healing space, preserving Sarah's roses while adding therapeutic landscaping elements. Each flower bed told a story, and plaques throughout the garden shared wisdom from Sarah's journals. The stone angel remained at its heart, watching over children who came to find peace among the blooms. The most revolutionary change came in the form of the Hope's Haven Institute, a training center for orphanage workers nationwide. Mrs. Thompson's methods were documented and taught, creating a curriculum that balanced professional care with personal attention. The institute became a model for how traditional wisdom could enhance modern childcare practices. But Marcus established a foundation that ensured Hope's Haven would never face financial uncertainty again. But instead of imposing corporate efficiency metrics, the foundation measured success through children's emotional well-being, personal growth, and long-term stability. Sarah's belief in nurturing the whole child became the cornerstone of their approach. The renovation included private spaces where children could maintain connections with their past. Each resident had a memory box, inspired by Sarah's time capsule, where they could store personal treasures. The building's historic features: the creaky third step, the height marks on doorframes, the hidden reading nooks were preserved as part of its healing heritage. The path to reconciliation began in Sarah's garden, where Emily found Marcus one evening, carefully tending her mother's roses. He didn't see her at first, absorbed in gently pruning the bushes with a tenderness she hadn't thought him capable of. In his expensive suit, kneeling in the dirt, he finally looked less like a billionaire and more like the young man her mother had loved. "She taught me about roses yesterday," Marcus said without turning, sensing Emily's presence, through her journals. Each variety she planted had a meaning. He gestured to a deep red bloom. "This one," she wrote, "reminded her of my determination. The white ones represented hope for our future." She never stopped believing in either of us. Emily sat beside him on the garden bench, holding her mother's last letter. "She wrote about you," she said softly. "Not the CEO, but the dreamer who talked about changing the world over coffee." For the first time, Emily could see past the corporate facade to the father her mother had known, passionate, idealistic human. Their conversations began tentatively, sharing memories of Sarah through different lenses. Marcus spoke of their early days, while Emily shared the evidence of her mother's secret presence throughout her life. Together, they pieced together a fuller picture of the woman who had loved them both enough to make impossible choices. The turning point came when Marcus showed Emily his own time capsule, decades of newspaper clippings, photographs and mementos of her accomplishments that he had collected since discovering her identity. "I may have missed your past," he said, voice breaking, "but I was watching too, trying to learn who my daughter had become." Emily began inviting Marcus to Hope's Haven's events, not as a CEO or benefactor, but as family. He attended art shows, sat through school performances, and learned every child's story. The children, sensing the healing taking place, adopted him as Miss Emmy's dad, drawing him into their world of simple joys and unconditional acceptance. Gradually, the wall between them crumbled. Emily recognized that Marcus's transformation of Hope's Haven wasn't just a corporate strategy, but a labor of love, his way of honoring both Sarah's legacy and their shared future. In preserving the soul of her childhood home while securing its future, he had demonstrated understanding of what truly mattered. Hope's Haven's grand reopening ceremony took place on a bright spring morning, with Sarah's roses in full bloom. Emily and Marcus stood together on the front steps, watching as families gathered on the freshly restored grounds. The children, who had been temporarily relocated, rushed back to their home, exclaiming over the careful preservation of their favorite spaces alongside the thoughtful improvements. Tommy, now speaking clearly, led tours of the new art therapy center, proudly showing visitors the wall where his first painting still hung. Mrs. Thompson, silver-haired, gleaming in the sunlight, conducted ribbon-cutting duties with the dignity of one who had never doubted this day would come. Cook Martha's famous chocolate chip cookies wafted their welcome from the modernized kitchen. The ceremony reached its emotional peak when Emily and Marcus unveiled the Sarah Collins Memorial Garden. Together, they shared the story of a woman whose love had bridged seemingly impossible gaps between wealth and poverty, presence and absence, past and future. The stone angel, carefully restored, watched over a new generation of children finding solace among the blooms. Marcus announced his retirement from corporate life, revealing his plans to teach business ethics at the Hope's Haven Institute. "My daughter and her mother taught me that true value isn't measured in dollars," he told the gathered crowd. "It's measured in moments of transformation, in lives touched, in love given without expectation of return." Emily's art program expanded to serve not just Hope's Haven's residents, but children from orphanages across the city. She and Marcus established a scholarship fund in Sarah's name, providing art education to underprivileged children. The walls of Hope's Haven filled with new artwork, hanging alongside preserved pieces from its long history. The day ended with a family dinner in Mrs. Thompson's private quarters. Emily, Marcus, and the woman who had been a mother to them, both in different ways, shared memories and dreams for the future. On the wall hung a newly discovered portrait, Sarah's last painting, showing the three of them together, a prophetic vision of reconciliation she hadn't lived to see. As twilight settled over Hope's Haven, Emily and Marcus walked through the garden one last time. The evening air carried the scent of roses and new beginnings. They stopped at the Stone Angel, where Emily placed her mother's locket among the flowers. "She would have loved this," Emily said softly. Marcus nodded, understanding that in the end, Sarah's greatest gift had been showing them both the true meaning of family. As this touching story of love, sacrifice, and redemption comes to an end, we invite you to be part of our storytelling family. Your subscription helps us continue crafting these meaningful narratives that remind us of the power of forgiveness and unconditional love. Please share this story with those who might need its message today. Leave a like and let us know in the comments how this journey touched your heart. Every like, share, and comment helps us reach more souls seeking stories of hope and healing.